Welcome aboard Holland America Line's newest ship, the Rotterdam. This past December, I spent my winter holiday break on board this beautiful vessel, embarking on an epic 14-day cruise from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, down to the Eastern and Western Caribbean. We stopped at 7 ports along the way, getting to experience a little taste of Turks and Caicos, San Juan, Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, a private island in the Bahamas, Ocho, Rios, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and Cozumel, Mexico. So whether you're a first-time cruiser, are curious about the Holland America experience in particular, or if you just want to check out some fun Caribbean destinations, then you've come to the right place. We'll go day by day so you can get a sense of the ship and the overall experience as a whole. I'll show you what I did to keep busy on sea days, along with showing you some of what these beautiful Caribbean ports have to offer cruise passengers who are just visiting for the day. This was a long trip and there's a lot to cover, so the video is divided into chapters, one for each day of the itinerary in case you want to skip around to a specific section or port of interest. I'll also leave all relevant links in the video description below. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started. We departed Los Angeles on an overnight flight, arriving bright and early the following morning in Miami, Florida. After a quick ride north on the new Brightline train, we arrived at Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale, where the Rotterdam was waiting for us. After a brief wait, it was time to board. I was very excited to start the vacation, but a little apprehensive about the weather. Those palm trees were really moving in the wind. We hoped for the best, though. We headed first to our cabin, which was on Deck 5, called the Gershwin Deck. Holland America is big on music, so many of the decks have music-inspired names. We booked a balcony cabin, which was bright and clean with very simple decor. The balcony itself was a nice size, and I found myself really hoping the weather would cooperate so we could take advantage of it. After a quick lunch up on Deck 9, the Lido deck, home to the buffet, which I'll show you in a bit more detail later on, we headed down to find the ship's library so we could get first crack at our choice of books. This is the best library I've ever seen on a cruise ship. It was a gorgeous space that felt more like a fancy bookstore than a library, and the selection of books was excellent. If you're a reader like me, I definitely recommend heading here early on Embarkation Day to get first dibs. Soon enough, it was almost time to set sail. I headed to the Lido pool deck sail-away party, where I enjoyed a glass of champagne at the pool bar before I headed up to Deck 11 to wave goodbye to Fort Lauderdale as we set sail. The weather was holding, but man was it windy up there. I eventually moved back down to a more protected area as we sailed out of Florida and into the open ocean. Wiped out from the red-eye flight, the rest of the day was quiet, unpacking and having an early dinner at the buffet called the Lido Market. It's a nice buffet, the food is good, and with different themed stations. Most of the main dishes are served by staff. It's only simple items that passengers can take for themselves, so there can be lines at the popular spots during prime meal times. We'd end up eating here many times during the cruise, mostly for breakfast or lunch, but the buffet is also nice for dinner when you just aren't in the mood for a more time-consuming sit-down multi-course dining room meal. Day 2, our first full day on board, was a pretty quiet one, sleeping in and starting to explore the ship a little bit. We spent a bit of our morning up on Deck 12 checking out the Exploration Central area. It's a really nice observation lounge that also has a bar and a board game room. They had so many game options. This was such a nice space to spend some time in. The rest of my day centered on the spa areas. The Greenhouse Spa and Salon is a great place to spend some time pampering yourself on sea days. There's a ton of different massage and facial options. You can get your nails or hair done, or even visit the acupuncturist. The treatment rooms are lovely, and my massage was definitely the highlight of the first sea day. The treatments are, of course, an extra charge, but if you have the budget for them, the spa is a delectable indulgence and was a lovely way to start the trip. We spent the late afternoon and early evening in the thermal spa, which is just across from Greenhouse. It's also an extra charge. We bought a pass for the duration of the cruise, but I think it's worth it. There's a large pool and various steam and shower options, lots of comfy seating, and I would end up spending many an hour reading on these heated stone loungers over the next 2 weeks at sea. It was a full day of rest and relaxation as we geared up for the next day's early docking at our first port of call. Welcome to Turks and Caicos, a British overseas territory made up of 40 islands. We docked on day 3 at Grand Turk Island at the main cruise port just south of the capital, Cockburn Town. The Rotterdam arrived bright and early at 7 a.m., despite some rough seas and questionable weather heading into port. We had decided in advance not to book an excursion here, and just to spend the day relaxing at the cruise port and nearby beach. It ended up being a good choice, as the weather was still quite iffy when we got off the ship. But in general, if you're looking to have a nice, easy beach day, this is a great port to do it in. Some cruise ports are really just drop-off points with some duty-free shops attached, but this one is kind of a self-contained one-stop shop for fun and entertainment. It has its own shopping village with plenty of choices for souvenirs, and is a great spot to pick up any last-minute items you may have forgotten, like flip-flops or extra sunscreen. There's a Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville restaurant complete with a huge pool, plenty of seating, a swim-up bar, and even a flow rider. As you can see, not everything was open in full swing though, as the weather looked ready to turn any minute. The best thing about this port, though, is that there's a gorgeous beach that is literally right next to the dock. No cabs or long hikes, you just walk off your ship and you're right there. I spent a little time sitting and relaxing, and a little time exploring up and down the beach, but we did end up heading back to the ship a tad early as it started to rain. Can't hold that against Grand Turk, though. We didn't luck out with a great day here weather-wise, but overall, it's a perfect port for enjoying yourself without having to spend extra money on shore excursions. Granted, hanging out at the cruise port is not going to give you a feel for Grand Turk as a destination or get you exposed to the local culture, but if you're looking to just hang and relax, this is a nice spot for it. It was still early afternoon when we boarded, so we headed to the Lido pool deck as we knew despite the weather, we'd still be okay to lounge around by the pool. That's because the Rotterdam pool deck has a retractable roof. When it's hot and sunny, it's open. But on days like Turks and Caicos Day, it can close up, and everyone still gets to enjoy hanging out poolside. It does get a smidge stuffy in there when the roof has been closed for a while, but I'll take that over being rained out any day. I wasn't really feeling all that great that evening, so we ended up having an easy dinner in the buffet before calling it a night. I wanted to be on my A game for the next day's port. Day 4's docking wasn't until early afternoon, so I spent the morning getting a workout in. The gym on board is really nice, with treadmills that face the ocean, so you have beautiful views to distract you while you're running in place. It's a pretty good size and well-stocked, but it can get quite crowded on sea days, which is why I tried to use it when I thought it would be a bit emptier. A drop after 1 p.m., we were given clearance to disembark into San Juan, Puerto Rico. Once again, we didn't book an excursion here, as we wanted to just spend the afternoon wandering at our own pace, exploring and getting lost in the old San Juan quarter, which is conveniently located a short walk from the cruise terminal. Meandering through Viejo San Juan is like traveling back in time. This is one of the oldest cities in the United States, with buildings dating back to the 16th century. We started our walk down the Paseo de la Princesa, past the lovely Roots Fountain, which commemorates the early history of Puerto Rico. We turned up toward the city gate, enjoying a lovely stroll sandwiched between the Bay of San Juan and the western Old City Wall. Of course, we had to stop to visit a couple of cute locals before we continued on. And do be mindful while walking this route along the water. The ocean can and does splash up. We finally arrived at the Puerto de San Juan, which is the most famous of the entrances to the old walled city, and in we went. The next hour or so was just spent wandering through these lovely old colonial streets, admiring the pretty pastel-colored architecture and just enjoying the ambiance. I hadn't done much research on Viejo San Juan prior to the trip, so I wasn't sure what to expect here, but I was just mesmerized by all the old-world elegance as we strolled along these gorgeous blue cobblestone streets. We stopped for a bit at the Catedral de San Juan, one of the oldest churches in the Americas. A beautiful place to soak up some history and take a rest and a break from the Caribbean sun, which had finally come out after a slightly rainy start to the day. While the plan for Viejo San Juan was mostly just to wander, we did have an end destination in mind that we were hoping to visit, the Castillo San Felipe del Morro. It's a massive 16th century citadel that was designed to protect the city from sea-based attacks. It's a very popular tourist site, and you can of course tour the inside, but we did not check opening hours ahead of time and got there a little too late. That was a bummer, but also a good lesson and reminder. Check in advance for hours and keep an eye on the clock if you want to visit tourist sites. We slowly made our way back toward the cruise terminal area, as we had a seafood restaurant in mind to try for dinner, Cayo Caribe. This place was a recommendation, and man, was it delicious. I loved everything, but especially the Puerto Rican specialty I ordered, mofongo. Oh my gosh, so good. Night had fallen by this point, so we headed back to the ship to check out some of the onboard evening activities. First on the agenda, we bounced around between a couple of live music venues on Deck 2, the Plaza Deck. The B.B. King Blues Club featured a delightful mix of Southern blues, jazz, and soul music performed on a large stage in front of a big dance floor. There's seating all around, as well as additional seating upstairs on Deck 3 if you prefer to watch the action from above with a bird's eye view. We then spent some time at Billboard Onboard, home to dueling pianos. The performers sing and play and take requests and keep you completely engaged. The musicians on our cruise really fed off each other and just oozed talent with both their instruments and with their vocals. Holland America takes their music very seriously. All the artists here are amazing. We finished off the evening taking in a comedy show at the World Stage, the main theater venue on board. All in all, a fabulous and busy day 4. I absolutely loved Viejo San Juan. I can't wait to return one day and experience more of what Puerto Rico has to offer. Day 5 was another port day, an early docking in the capital of Charlotte Amalie on the island of St. Thomas, which is part of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Isn't this a fabulous view to wake up to? Balcony cabin? So worth it. We did book an excursion through the cruise line for St. Thomas called Kayak, Hike, and Snorkel Kaz Key. It was a little pricey at $169.95 per person, but we liked the variety it offered, so we decided to go for it. You start off with a short drive to the start point, which I kind of liked as it gave us a chance to see a bit of what the island interior looked like. Upon arrival at the Kaz Key Mangrove Lagoon area, which is a marine and wildlife sanctuary, you'll have some time to get ready at the lockers before piling into the kayaks. These are sit-on-top kayaks, and they're not too hard to maneuver, even if you're a kayaking newbie. The kayaking section is the longest piece of the kayak, hike, and snorkel excursion, and the way you paddle out is the reverse of what you'll do on the way back in. Life jackets are provided, but make sure you bring a hat and sunglasses. It's pretty intense sun out there. There's some open kayaking sections, some breaks where the group would gather to learn about local flora and fauna, and some kayaking through tight spaces in the mangroves, which was probably my favorite part, although we did bump a couple of times.
Oh, get a tree.
You'll leave the kayaks at the shore upon reaching Kaz Key, an uninhabited island, where you'll start the hiking portion. You'll follow the beach for a bit, occasionally heading inland. The guides will stop from time to time to explain a bit about the local plant life.
All you guys look around, you guys see all the other leaves just fighting for sunlight. This guy's just waiting for something to rain on, all right, guys? It has 7 different water-based toxins.
And there's a group activity where you'll look for local hermit crabs to see whose is the fastest. They're pretty easy to find. They're literally everywhere.
First one outside the big circle. All right, come on. Okay, come on. Krabby Patty. Winner, chicken dinner.
The highlight of the hike and the turnaround point is the Red Point Blowhole, a geological marine geyser. The seawater gets compressed between the rocks and then blasts out, creating a fun photo op if you time it just right. We worked up a good sweat on the walk back before the brief snorkel portion of the tour. It was nice to get wet on a hot day, but truthfully, there's not a ton of interesting things to see in the water here. Finally, it was back in the kayaks, retracing the route through the mangrove lagoon. The way back always seems faster somehow when you know exactly how far you need to go. The bus took us back to the cruise terminal, and that was that. Hung out for a bit in the port taking some photos before we headed back to the ship. The afternoon was spent at the Lido pool, which we got to enjoy with the roof open. That evening, we finally had our first formal sit-down dinner in the main dining room. This is the sit-down dining space included in the cruise fare, where you have a 3-course meal with waiter service. It's an elegant space, very light and airy with blue, white, and yellow glass ceiling fixtures. The service was lovely and the food was quite good. Definitely better than many restaurants I've been to on land. Next, we headed to the Orange Party, which is a staple of Holland America cruises. The party is a nod to Holland America's Dutch heritage, with Dutch-inspired food, classic cocktails, and tons of Orange Party favors. It was held on the Plaza deck, mostly in the BB King Blues Club. So make sure you pack something orange to wear. Casual or fancy, doesn't matter, just make sure it's orange. We finished off the night at the Ocean Bar, experimenting with one of their very fancy cocktails. It was the perfect way to end what was another long but fulfilling day. Day 6 was the second sea day, a perfect opportunity to take advantage of some of the activities on the daily program. I headed to the World Stage Theater for a behind-the-scenes look at how the ship works, and it was great meeting some of the many people that keep the Rotterdam the well-oiled floating vacation palace that we all got to enjoy. I also spent some time walking around the outdoor promenade deck, which goes all the way around the ship, 3 laps equaling about a mile or 1.6 kilometers. The deck was never very crowded, although it can be quite windy out there. While I love all the excitement that the insides of modern cruise ships have to offer, sometimes it's nice to just take a stroll on the promenade and embrace the simple delight of being out to sea. Mid-afternoon was spent at afternoon tea, held in the main dining room. As we were approaching Christmas, this tea was Nutcracker themed, and as a big tea drinker, I absolutely adored this whole experience. My next activity I was also looking forward to, adult coloring. They provide you with color pencils and a few picture options to choose from. I find coloring so relaxing, and I was pretty happy with how my skull came out. For dinner that evening, we dressed up for our reservation at one of the specialty restaurants on board, the Pinnacle Grill Steakhouse. It is an extra charge, but even as a non-steak eater, I thought it was well worth the additional cost. The food was excellent, from our clothesline bacon appetizer, to the main dishes, to the desserts. Impeccable service, and just a delightful dinner experience. We took advantage of being already dressed up to pose for a few formal portraits to commemorate the trip. These backdrops are set up throughout the common areas of the ship, and then you can decide later on what to purchase in the photo shop located on the promenade deck. As the first half of the cruise was winding down, on day 7 we headed to Half Moon Cay in the Bahamas. Formerly known as Little San Salvador Island, this is a private island owned by the Carnival Corporation, whose umbrella Holland America falls under. This is a tender port, so you'll board a smaller boat to take you to shore. Half Moon Cay has a small welcome village offering plenty of shopping, and beach access is just a couple minutes walk from the pier. Half Moon Cay Beach is about 2 miles of powdery soft sand and turquoise waters. There were some iffy clouds in the sky, but thankfully the weather held for the duration of our time in port. I'll mention here that I have a separate video that's an in-depth tour of Half Moon Cay, so if you want to check that out, the link card is above, and I'll leave the link in the video description as well. Our 14-day cruise itinerary actually had 2 days at Half Moon Cay, so I got to know this place pretty well. For today's first visit, I focused on the shore excursions. Half Moon Cay is mostly about relaxing and hanging out on the beach, but there are a few extra cost activities as well, and I decided on 2 of them. The first one I did was horseback riding, which was a little pricey at $119.95 per person, but horseback riding is always a bit expensive, and I loved the idea of riding in the Caribbean. After a short tram ride a bit further down the island, we arrived at the stables. We met our horses, spent some time in the corral getting comfortable and acquainted, and then we were off. We spent the first half of the ride on an inland trail before heading out to the beach to walk in the surf. Now, ordinarily the horses swim, which I was really excited about, but because of the rough weather, the swim was changed to a walk along the surf for the horses' safety. A bit of a bummer, but still a really beautiful ride. We had lunch afterwards at the dining pavilion, which is included in the cruise fare. It's mostly beach foods like hamburgers and hot dogs. After digesting, we headed to the second shore excursion, the Stingray Encounter. This was a much more affordable activity at $34.95 per person. We got to meet some of the stingrays, of course, learning about them, giving them some affection, and getting some free time to swim around with them in their fenced-off lagoon enclosure. We also got to meet a sea cucumber and a conch. As soon as we were done, it was back to the ship, as this was an early departure day. I spent some time on our balcony that afternoon, enjoying watching the ocean go by as we sailed away from the Bahamas before heading back to the pool to get in some more reading and relaxation, well earned after a very busy morning and early afternoon. Dinner that evening was at Tamarind, the specialty restaurant that features Southeast Asian cuisine. Within the Tamarind space, there's also a sushi counter and a full bar serving specialty Asian-themed cocktails. We had a lovely dinner at Tamarind, ordering probably half the appetizers on the menu. My ginger lobster main was divine. Really loved the upscale, elegant Tamarind space, and thought this was very much worth the small upcharge. Spent some time after dinner at the Rolling Stone Rock Room venue, enjoying some classic rock hits before calling it a night. The next morning, we were back at Port Everglades. Hello, Florida. I'll mention here that our 14-day cruise was actually 2 separate 7-day trips that we booked back to back. So today, most people disembarked to go home, but there were about 300 of us that stayed to join all the new folks boarding for the next 7 days of fun. We did have to get off the ship briefly in the morning to go through immigration, but then we were right back on. I spent a lot of today walking around the ship, doing much of the filming for this video and for the complete full ship tour that I've already posted. So if you're interested in seeing the Rotterdam deck by deck in way more detail than I show you here, that video card is above, or else you can find the link in this video's description as well. The nice thing about having back-to-back cruises is 2 sail-away celebrations. I spent this sail away moving all around the ship, but of course popped outside as we were once again sailing away from Florida. In the late afternoon, I spent some time enjoying the Grand Dutch Cafe, which is a uniquely themed food and beverage spot. Much like the Orange Party that celebrates the line's ties to the Netherlands, The Grand Dutch Cafe is a unique Holland America offering and the place to go to try all things Dutch. It's also a nice spot to work, read, or just people watch. There are so many Dutch specialties to try here. I also used the sail away day to get in some onboard souvenir shopping. As soon as we reached international waters, the stores opened back up again. I'm not a huge shopper, but I do like to browse, and there are plenty of shops on board offering everything from the basics to the high end. Good variety to keep you busy, even just as a mostly window shopper like me. Day 9 was a little deja vu. Welcome once again to Half Moon Cay. Since we knew we were visiting the island twice, we planned accordingly. The first stop was all about getting our bearings, figuring out where things were, and doing the activities, horseback riding and the stingray encounter. Today was the beach day, and boy, did that plan work out since the weather was much better today than it had been 48 hours prior. We paid in advance for a clamshell, which are these big blue shades that cover a set of chairs. They were $50 per clamshell and very worth it to keep out of the sun all day. There are also small cabanas and large villas that you can rent, but those can cost hundreds and into the thousands of dollars. I spent a lot of time today playing in the water, but I also wanted to see the entire available stretch of beach, so I walked the near 2 miles to go all the way down to the end. It's a gorgeous walk that terminates in this rocky area. I was so glad I went exploring because on the way back, I ended up passing the horseback riding area at just the right time to catch the horses swimming. I had a little pang of sadness that 48 hours earlier I didn't get to go, but I was really grateful that I at least got to watch. After the long walk back to the main area of the beach, I treated myself to a lobster roll at the Lobster Shack, where I managed to snag the very last one of the day. I enjoyed the beach and my final visit to Half Moon Cay until the latest possible hour, before getting on the last tender of the day back to the Rotterdam. Before we departed for the cruise, I looked at the repeat of Half Moon Cay as one of the negatives of choosing this particular back-to-back itinerary, but in the end, I was really happy having 2 days on the island. One shorter day to play, and the longer day to enjoy the beautiful Caribbean beach. After spending so much time in the heat, I was wiped. So for dinner, we decided to treat ourselves to room service, which we never do, and we kicked back in the room to watch Titanic. Where better to watch a movie about a passenger ship that sinks, right? Day 10 was Christmas Eve and our third sea day. Had my first breakfast experience in the dining room, which was lovely. Lots of Christmas things to enjoy on board. My favorite was this gingerbread display. It was so intricate, I couldn't believe how elaborate and detailed it was. Even complete with a little train. Not much else new to show you for this third sea day. Did a little gym, a little filming, a little cafe people watching, and a lot of thermal spa. If you ever think to yourself, gee, what else did she do to pass all those hours on board? I was likely in the thermal spa. We had Christmas Eve dinner in the dining room, then out for a casual drink before hitting the hay. Christmas Day was going to be action-packed. Day 11. Merry Christmas and welcome to Ocho Rios, Jamaica. We woke up to beautiful views of the port and were eager to disembark and get the day started. We booked a river tubing excursion in advance, which was $89.95 per person. We got off to a bit of a rocky start, as the organization for meeting your shore excursion guide was beyond chaotic. I eventually found someone to guide me to the right spot, although even when heading toward the bus, I was still not 100% sure I was going to the right place. Once we got to the bus and moving, everything was okay though. And our bus guide was lovely, giving us some tips on Jamaican phrases as we headed inland to the White River Valley. We got dropped off first to get geared up, as helmets and life jackets are required. There's a souvenir shop with gifts and snacks, but this is where you end the river tour, so it makes more sense to me to stop here after you've finished the river ride. Once everyone was set, it was back to the bus to head to the river drop-off point. We lined up along a stairway that led down to the White River, as the guides helped us into the tubes one by one. Technically, we were split into several groups, but I lost my guide almost immediately. Really, you're just one large group with multiple guides to help you and keep you on track. Loading into the river took a while, but soon enough we were off, headed under the bridge and off into the river. The river is mostly smooth and relaxing, and with so many people, you're never too far from your neighbor and don't have to worry about getting lost. It's not a bumper boat activity per se, but you will gently knock into strangers throughout the ride. The river does have a light current, but if you get stuck, as I did a couple of times, there are multiple guides in the water to nudge you back out into the flow. There are a few sections with some white water, though it's nothing too crazy. These sections were definitely my favorite part of the ride, though. Before you float into the white water, particularly where the river gets tight, there are ropes to hold onto to wait your turn, and the guides help manage the traffic flow of the tubes. Most of the ride is gentle, though, giving you plenty of time to take in the scenery or even hop out of the tube and swim for a bit if you want. There's also a bar set up at one point mid-river where you can get a cocktail, which you pay for at the end of the ride. When you reach the end point of the ride, getting out is pretty easy. There's a rope to hold onto to drag yourself toward the staircase. You wait your turn, plop out, hand off your tube, climb up the stairs, and the guide takes care of chucking the tube back on land. It's a short walk back to the building that we geared up at when we first arrived, and the walk terminates with this fun rope bridge. I didn't buy any souvenirs here, but did stop to befriend the local pups before heading back to the bus. This excursion was so much fun. Definitely a non-traditional way to spend Christmas, but I loved every second of it. I'm going to do a full video on the Jamaica tubing experience with more detail on the whole adventure, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. I popped back onto the ship to change out of my river clothes before heading outside again into the Jamaican sunshine, just to explore a bit of the immediate area. The secured port area, that you can only access as a cruise passenger, has a ton of little shops and information posted about local attractions and taxi prices, so if you want to do some independent activities while you're in port, you'll be well informed. Just outside the port area, there are some tourist shops and restaurants, but they didn't like me filming. It's all in this area right here, though. Here's the back of the Jamaica sign. Super close to the ship and looked like a fun spot to hang out. And with that, I slowly headed back to the ship. I really like Jamaica. This was my first time here, and I just really enjoyed the vibes, and there's so much to do and see here. This is definitely a destination I'll return to one day to fully explore. Mid to late afternoon we spent at the pool on the back of the Lido deck. The Rotterdam does have two pools, but we didn't use this one as much since it's more windy back here, and we hadn't had the best weather thus far. It's got awesome views, though. The only downside is that the smoking section is back here, but we did our best to sit as far from the cigarette smoke as possible, and it wasn't too much of an issue. But what a lovely afternoon, enjoying a drink with the beauty of Jamaica in the background. We even had unexpected Christmas visitors. They must have been so hot in those outfits. Around 4 p.m., the horns blew, and it was time to say goodbye to Ocho Rios. Until next time. Christmas dinner we had in the dining room with a special holiday menu. All in all, an unorthodox but wonderful Christmas day. The action continued on day 12, with an early arrival at our next port of call, Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Welcome to the Cayman Islands. Grand Cayman is a tender port, so like Half Moon Cay, we boarded a smaller boat to take us to shore. Tender ports can certainly make disembarking a much slower process, but I kind of love them because you get killer close-up views of your ship. As a bit of a ship nerd, I think this is way more fun than just walking off at a dock. The cruise terminal here is small but useful, with plenty of maps and information boards for people who are looking to do their own independent activities. We didn't book anything through Holland America for Grand Cayman. We instead booked a third-party shuttle to take us to the famous 7 Mile Beach, which is a 10 to 15-minute drive from the cruise terminal. Once we arrived, the famous beach did not disappoint. There are rows of chairs set up, which you can use for a small additional fee, and waiters also come around to take drink orders. You don't really get to choose where you sit, you're kind of shown to where they want you to be, so you're likely not going to end up with a direct ocean view. The chairs are unfortunately packed pretty tightly, which I didn't love, but it is what it is. And don't expect to have a piece of beach to yourself in this area, especially if you're coming for the day on a cruise ship, because this place gets crazy crowded. But what do you expect? This beach is famous for a reason. It's absolutely beautiful. Perfect sand and gorgeous turquoise water. It's popular for a reason. I did some walking up and down the beach, but didn't want to stray too far from our home base, and everything was kind of the same in both directions anyway. So our time here was spent reading, swimming, and occasionally chasing around the odd chicken. Our shuttle was a little late picking us up for the return ride, but we eventually got back to the port area in plenty of time for departure. There's lots more to do in Grand Cayman besides 7 Mile Beach, and I've got a tentative return trip already planned, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss seeing what Grand Cayman is like underwater. So it's not really goodbye to Grand Cayman, it's nice to meet you and see you again soon. We spent the rest of the day on board the ship doing the usual, chilling by the Lido pool, soaking in the thermal spa, and enjoying another lovely dinner. Day 13 was the last port day of the trip, Cozumel, Mexico. Started off with a delightful brunch in the dining room before we docked about 1 p.m. I'll be honest, by this point in the trip, I was running on empty, and I've been to Cozumel as a diver a couple of times in the past, so we took it really easy here. But if you're a first-time visitor, this port is amazing. There are cruise ship docks right in the main town, San Miguel de Cozumel, but we had the misfortune of docking at the cruise terminal that is too far from town to walk. So the only thing we had access to on foot was the cruise port itself, which surprisingly was quite cute. After walking the lengthy dock and through what must be the world's longest duty-free shop, you emerge in a little village filled with shops and restaurants. It's definitely not a real place like San Miguel de Cozumel. The village is purely for tourists, but it was fun to walk around the shops and restaurants and some of the kitschy little spots that they had set up. It's a long walk back to the ship, and you actually can hire a pedicab to give you a ride back if your energy is running low. Back on board the Rotterdam, the rest of the day was spent on our balcony, kind of having our own little party and enjoying our final days in the cabin. I shuffled back and forth to the bar, getting some margaritas, and we just enjoyed the afternoon outside. The Rotterdam was parked directly across from the MSC Magnifica, who was blasting music all day, so that ship was essentially our DJ for the afternoon. Somehow day quickly bled into night, and before I knew it, the sun had set, and again, as a ship nerd, I enjoyed the close-up view of watching the Magnifica pull in its ropes and head out to sea. Bon voyage to the Magnifica, and soon to us as well. It was time for us to head back to Florida. Day 14 was the final sea day and the last full day of the trip. It was spent getting in a last round of everything. Last hangout on the balcony, last drinks, last lazy evening at the thermal spa. I also had my second massage at the greenhouse spa, which was a lovely way to unwind after nearly 2 weeks straight of adventures. I rushed to finish my last library book. I literally read at dinner that night to make sure it was returned on time. We saw our final show, a magic performance at the World Stage Theater, and that was that. Friday, December 29th, we woke up back in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and this time we actually had to get off for good. I stayed on the balcony until the last possible second, until it was time to call it a vacation. Off the ship, into the cab, and off to the Miami airport. So that was my 14-day Eastern and Western Caribbean cruise. If you've made it to the end of the video, then I sincerely hope you enjoyed coming along on the journey. We had an absolute blast, and I was a little apprehensive about this trip beforehand, as Holland America has a reputation for catering more to an older crowd, and my partner and I are millennials. If you want to hear more about what I thought the pros and cons of Holland America were, coming from the perspective of a couple in their early 40s, then check out the video card above, and of course the link is also in the video description. If you enjoyed this cruise vlog, then please do give it a like, as it really helps the video grow. And if you want to join me for more future adventures, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Do check out one of the videos linked in the description or from the playlist above. I have lots more to share, both at sea, under the sea, and on land too. So hope to see you again soon. Until then, happy cruising!